Hi, this is my overview for my second lesson observation. It was done on Friday, November 13th, 2020. So, just a little information about the class itself. This was an Algebra 1 Regents class, and it was seventh period. So it was from 12:31 p.m. to 1:11 p.m. The class size was 24 students, and I have a range of ninth to 11th graders in that class. Two of those students have IEP or 504 plans. And then the classroom's a little bit different because of our high flex model at Williamsville. So this was done on Friday. So I have my group B students in person. These are 10 students. And the other students, so my group A students and my completely virtual students, were, so that was about 14 of them, they were online and they met through Zoom. So I teach in person and then I'm also logged on to Zoom at the same time. So students online see what's going on in the classroom. And the students in the classroom can hear the students who are online when they participate. So, my lesson overview, this had two objectives. It was Unit 5, Day 3. The objectives were that students would be able to identify numbers and expressions that are perfect squares, and students will be able to factor using the method of dots or difference of two squares. This does match up with the Common Core state standards for high school algebra, and they want to see structure in an expression and identify ways to rewrite it otherwise known as factoring. And they even show that this example is a difference of two squares. So students should be able to recognize what's a difference of two squares and know how to factor it. So, warming up with my lesson was I did an anticipatory set, and it was a little different for both groups of students. So, my in person students were given a post it note with a number, variable, or expression. They were then to decide whether or not it was a perfect square, and then students would organize the post it notes on the board. So, I put perfect squares on one side of the board, non-perfect squares on another side of the board, and students put their sticky note on where they felt it fell. And they kind of had a discussion as a class about where things went. They were asking their friends, etc. My students online had access to an interactive Google Slides. That slide contained the same expressions as the ones my in-person did. And each student had to drag at least one expression and decide whether or not it was a perfect square. So this is what it looked like. And this is actually the completed version of it. So they dragged it, whether or not it was a perfect square or non-perfect square. And my students in person were actually kind of seeing students drag this as they went along, so in real time. And then we had some discussions about what matched up, what was different from our in-person versus our online students. And I made sure there were enough choices that all students online were able to drag at least one of the expressions. So as a whole class, we discussed what a perfect square was. My students gave me the definition. We compared and contrasted the online work versus the in-person, which expressions matched up, which were different, and then we made corrections as needed. This led us into the topic of factoring by dots. So I was able to actually pull this up on the board for both the people in person and online could see, and I dragged things back and forth, made corrections, and discussed it there. So, my reflection, I thought this was a great way to activate the background knowledge of the students. They already knew what a perfect square was. And I also was able to use multiple formats to get students in person and online involved in the same activity about the same thing. It would have been super nice if my students had their own devices in person and they all could have worked on the same interactive Google Slides. But my students in person, some do, some don't. I don't always have access to a Chromebook cart. So I had to find a different method to have those students work through labeling and identifying what was a perfect square and what wasn't. And I think overall, this was a very student-centered activity. The students made the connections, the students defined what a perfect square was, and I just helped facilitated the discussion. So next we move on to guided notes and direct instruction. And I've talked about this in my previous lesson. And I actually still, even though I'm back in the classroom, I still choose to write my notes through my iPad. So I share the screen on my iPad and I use Notability to write my notes. And this way, as I'm in person, I can walk around the room and I'm not so stationed in front of a documentary or a document camera or the whiteboard. Being able to walk around helps keep students focused. I can make sure they're all taking notes, and it just overall leads to better classroom management. My notes themselves are guided with a lot of opportunities for examples, models, practice, and I make the student participation drive the instruction. I'm constantly asking questions. I'm constantly looking for student volunteers to help with a problem or to fill things in. So these are what my notes look like. We got a little bit of fill in the blanks up top. We got a table that we're filling in, and then a ton of different examples and models for the students to look at. And then I kind of end with a more challenging question, a word problem, or something that uses more knowledge. This one used area on top of the factoring method that they just learned. My direct instruction reflection, I'm definitely still trying to work how to seamlessly interact with students online and in person. It is so common for me to get so excited about the responses from the students in person that I don't ask students online as much. I just have the students in person. They participate, they volunteer, they respond right away. I don't take the extra few minutes to try to get students online to participate, although I do reserve a few questions for them. And I specifically say, okay, this one's for my online friends. I need to make sure I don't get carried away with the participation going on right in front of me and make it more equal among the opportunities I give to both groups of students. Next, we did a practice activity. And this practice activity, for my students online, they were given a Google Jamboard. And the students would be randomly put into a breakout room of 2, and they were to play Connect 4. So the students would take a dots problem at the top, factor it, find their match on the board, and then shade it in with their color. And then partner 2 would do the same. So let me show you what this looks like. So I have 9 different boards, and let me cover that back up. And based on the breakout room that the students were in, they would go to whatever board they were. So this was group 1, this was group 2. And then what they do is they take one of these problems and then they would shade it in with their color. So partner 1 was green. There's this little pen option. So you could change up the color or the highlighter or whatever you wanted to do. And once they found their answer, they shaded it in. Partner 2 then would choose another problem, whether they could choose the one right next to it, or they could actually look at the problem and try to block their partner. So maybe they'd want to block this one. So they'd find, okay, which one matches up and actually work backwards with factoring, which is kind of cool. And they go back and forth, and it looks like this person, partner 2, won because they did get 4 in a row. But you could see with other groups that they played, and just a different method of involving practice and not making it just boring, straight practice and students doing it on their own. They're a little more interactive. My students in person did the same game, except they used a Pocket Pro and dry erase markers. They went back and forth with the Pocket Pro and shaded in. As a whole class, I brought everyone back, and I asked students if anyone was won or if anyone was close to winning. Some students shared their strategies for blocking their opponents and what they did. So it was definitely a fun way to practice. So students really enjoyed this activity. And the cool thing about Jamboard, and I'll show it to you real quick, is if I pull down this tab, I can see every single board at once pretty quickly. So if I saw right here, and actually, group 2 is a complete blank board, I could go to breakout room 2 on Zoom and be like, hey, what's going on? Why isn't anyone doing anything? Maybe I need to clarify directions, or maybe none of the students were participating in the breakout room. So I thought that was a cool feature for me to watch what's going on without actually being in every single breakout room at once. As always, I have some students who wouldn't participate online. They didn't like their partner. They weren't comfortable around their partner and kept their cameras off and stayed muted. But I think incorporating more team building activities into the class would hopefully make students more comfortable and participate when they're in random groups like that. Last, I had an exit ticket. So I wanted students to independently show whether or not they could factor by dots. So I actually told the students, so I spoke the problem. I didn't post it anywhere. So students actually had to understand what I was saying and write it down and interpret that problem. I gave the students in person and online the same problem. My students online sent me a private chat, and once their private chat was seen by me and I was looking at it and I agreed with it, I was like, yes, nice job. They were able to leave, and that was kind of their goodbye. I was like, awesome, goodbye, enjoy your weekend. My students in person just wrote with their dry erase markers and showed it to me, held it up. So I was actually able to stay at my computer to check on the Zoom kids, as well as see what was going on for my in-person students. And this was a great way to help me see, okay, do I need to focus a lot more on this next week? Or do students understand it pretty well? And for the most part, they did understand it pretty well, which is great because we lead into idea of complete factoring, which uses multiple methods of factoring, including the one that they learned today, difference of two squares. Thanks so much.